In the architecture of modern thought, there is a load-bearing pillar that we are forbidden to inspect. It is not an empirical finding, it is not a mathematical necessity. It is a philosophical assumption so deeply embedded in our physics that we no longer recognize it as an assumption at all. That assumption is symmetry. Open any graduate textbook on quantum field theory, Peskin and Schroeder, Weinberg or Griffiths, and you will encounter a singular, unquestioned methodology. Nature is governed by symmetries. We are taught that the bedrock of reality is not stuff, but invariant mathematical forms. Particles are defined not by what they are, but by how they transform under symmetry groups like SU3 or U1. But where did this idea come from? Did we discover it in the data, or did we import it from a philosophy that predates science by 2,000 years? This is the story of the symmetry trap, how a Neoplatonic virus was planted in physics in the 1930s, how it seduced the architects of the Standard Model, and why it has led us into a metaphysical cul-de-sac where we mistake the map for the territory. It is time to correct the ontology. It is time to stop worshipping the form and start studying the flow. To understand the error, we must go back to its source. Werner Heisenberg. In 1932, physics was grappling with the newly discovered neutron. It looked suspiciously like the proton, similar mass, similar strong interactions. Why were they twins? Heisenberg proposed a radical solution. He suggested they were not two different particles, but two states of a single entity, rotated in an abstract mathematical space he called isospin. This rotation doesn't happen in the world you can touch. It happens in isospace, a purely mathematical realm Heisenberg invented. He didn't just find a pattern, he built a private heaven for the math to live in. This was a brilliant mathematical hack. But for Heisenberg, it was more than a tool. In his later reflections, Physics and Beyond, he explicitly connected this move to Plato's Timaeus. He wrote, "I was more or less convinced that if one wanted to understand the fundamental structures of matter, one would have to find the mathematical forms, the symmetries, which determined their properties." Heisenberg was rejecting Democritus, the idea of atoms as substantial building blocks, in favor of Plato's forms. He believed the math was the prior reality, and the particle was merely its shadow. This philosophical preference became dogma in 1954 with Yang and Mills. They took Heisenberg's isospin, which was an approximate symmetry, and elevated it to a foundational law. They built gauge theory. The logic of gauge theory is seductive but metaphysically dangerous. It says, we demand that our equations remain invariant, unchanged, even if we arbitrarily change the phase of the field at every point in space. But when you change the phase locally, the equation breaks. It loses its symmetry. To save the symmetry, you must force a correction term into the equation. And here is the sleight of hand. We call that correction term a force. The force is not the cause of the motion. The force is the consequence of the symmetry. In the Yang-Mills framework, the strong force doesn't exist because gluons are pushing quarks. The force exists because the math required a patch to stay symmetric. We reified a mathematical requirement into a physical entity. As Nobel laureate Sheldon Glashow would later admit, we built a cathedral of mathematics, but was it a cathedral of physics or of geometry? By the 1970s, the trap was shut. The Standard Model was constructed by guessing symmetry groups, U1 cross SU2 cross SU3, and deriving the universe from them. And it worked. The predictions were precise. The W and Z bosons were found exactly where the symmetry dictated. But prediction is not the same as understanding. As we refined the math, the ontology began to crack. The first crack appeared early in 1956. Chien-Shiung Wu shocked the world by proving that nature violates parity. The universe is left-handed. The weak force distinguishes left from right. If symmetry were the bedrock of reality, this should have been fatal. Nature explicitly shouted, "I am not symmetric." But we didn't abandon the Church of Symmetry. We just built an annex. We said, okay, parity is broken, but CP, charge parity, is conserved. Then that broke too, so we retreated to CPT. We keep retreating, but we never question the premise. Instead of abandoning the symmetry obsession, we doubled down. We invented spontaneous symmetry breaking. We said, the fundamental laws are symmetric, but the vacuum state is broken. We prioritized the map over the territory. When reality didn't fit the Platonist ideal, we didn't change the ideal. We invented a mechanism to hide the asymmetry. We demand the math stays the same everywhere. But when it doesn't, we invent a particle to connect the points. We literally glue the math back together and call that glue a gluon. The particle is a byproduct of our refusal to let the math break. We created a circular cage. We decided that only renormalizable, symmetric theories were legal mathematics. Then we expressed astonishment that nature seemed to obey symmetric laws. We didn't find the truth. We built a filter and called the residue reality. This brings us to the core philosophical conflict. This is not just about particles. It is about the nature of existence. Modern physics has adopted a Platonic ontology. The form, the math symmetry, is real. The particular, the energy particle, is derivative. Physics claims the symmetry generates the dynamics. Galileo Galilei, the father of our discipline, would reject this. For Galileo, mathematics was the language of description, not the engine of creation. Math describes the how of the motion. It is not the what that moves. In The Assayer, Galileo warned us not to mistake our sensations for the things themselves. He called smells and colors secondary qualities. Today we have made the ultimate error. We have turned symmetry, a mathematical sensation, into the primary quality and energy into the secondary one. We have divorced the tool from the grounding. We produce brilliant students who can calculate the Lagrangian of the universe, but who implicitly believe that math is the bedrock and energy is the shadow. They never saw the first principle of natural philosophy. Existence is not a set of rules. Existence is energy. So, how do we correct this? We do not abandon the math. We reinterpret the ontology. Symmetry is not the source of reality. Symmetry is the emergent stability of high-entropy thermodynamic processes. Consider the early universe. It begins in high-energy flux. As it cools, it undergoes phase transitions, baryogenesis. Energy knots itself into stable configurations, protons, neutrons. These knots exhibit symmetry because symmetry is the most efficient low-entropy way to maintain a boundary. A sphere is the shape that minimizes surface area for a given volume. The proton's SU3 symmetry isn't a Platonic law imposed from above. It is the thermodynamic equilibrium of gluons, finding their most stable flow. A soap bubble isn't a sphere because it read a textbook on SU2 symmetry. It's a sphere because it's under pressure. Symmetry is the shape of least resistance in a world of flow. Order is the residue of cooling, not the blueprint of creation. Baryogenesis isn't breaking a perfect abstract form. It is unbounded flux, raw, free-flowing energy, tying itself into bounded identity. When we flip this perspective, the symmetry trap dissolves. We realize that the laws of physics are not external commands. They are the constraint structures of energy and motion. The universe does not obey math. The universe acts, and math is the record of that action. This was Galileo's language of nature, us expressing nature in observed, non-qualitative ways, an expression that more closely matches the nature of nature. Yet this is not nature speaking directly to us, a fine yet critical nuance. To restore physics, we must return to the Galilean insight. We must stop worshipping the form and start studying the flow. We must recognize that identity, the distinctness of a proton, a cell, or a consciousness, emerges from the active work of energy maintenance, not from static mathematical definitions. You are not a representation of a symmetry group. You are a process. You are energy, bound by history, maintaining a fragile order against the tide of entropy. And that is a reality worth studying.